Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who will be reviewing The Smile and their album A Light for Attracting Attention. Now this is a solo project from Radiohead. What do you call it when multiple members from a band do something else? It's not a solo project. It's basically a trio project. The lead singer, the guitarist, and the producer, Tom York, Johnny Greenwood, Nigel Godrich respectively, all formed a band with the drummer from Sons of Kemet to create The Smile. Watch my video on their first single, You'll Never Work in Television Again. Click on the banana to watch that video. I sort of explain the basic idea that I think Radiohead is too unwieldy. There's too much pressure and expectation, so I think they just wanted a chance to make some fun music, to just make music without those expectations. And as I was getting ready to review this, I've had a few people comment, like, Sky, why did you only review their first two singles? And they've released 3 more singles since then. And I might have made a mistake, because when I listened to this album, when I listened to it for the first couple times, the songs I'd already reviewed, I liked a lot more than the rest. But what's the reason for that? Is it just the added exposure? Is it my familiarity? Probably. Or is there a chance that this is simply a collection of singles? Like, it's not like a real album. I mean, especially when we're used to Radiohead and their huge overarching thoughts and plans and themes and all that. Maybe this doesn't cut the mustard. Maybe it's not really an album. Maybe it's a collection of singles. Or maybe both. Maybe I didn't make a mistake. You see, I tried to compensate for this, so I listened to the album 3 times all the way through. And then I realized I needed to listen to the songs I hadn't heard yet. So I listened to all of those songs on repeat. And all of a sudden, once I'd done that, I understood it. And then I listened to it all over again, and I came to really love this album. Now, sometimes I get people who ask me, are you afraid to not like things? Do you ever feel pressure to like things? And it's not really that. It's that I have a lot of goodwill. So it's a thing I've developed over time where if an artist I really like releases something and I don't like it, they can go to the bank and take as much goodwill as they need to because I'm going to sit with it and I'm really going to listen to it. And maybe it's King of Limbs. Okay? Maybe it's an album which I've never really liked that much. I mean, it's got its high points, but no matter how much goodwill I poured into King of Limbs, it never quite returned itself as a satisfying Radiohead album, at least not to my ears. But still, I might revisit that position, because with artists like Radiohead, they have earned so much goodwill from me. So that's why I keep listening. That's why it may seem like I listen to the point where I feel like I have to like it. It's not that. It's like the difference between listening to the singles and listening to the whole album. Familiarity, especially with work as nuanced, as well produced, as deep as this, it deserves it. But this episode is going to go careening off into a whole nother direction. Look in the description if you only want to hear me talk about this album and the music, because I'm about to talk about poetry. You see, it turns out this band is called The Smile after a poem, or a poem, that is found in this compilation, Crow by Ted Hughes. And I want to talk about it a lot. I think it's important. Now, before I get started, I know a lot about French poetry. I don't know much about English poetry. I don't know anything about Ted Hughes. Straight talk, I'd never heard of him. Turns out he was married to Sylvia Plath. I've heard of her. And so I contacted one of my colleagues, a guy who I work with. Just to be clear, I don't represent my college. Neither does my colleague. And I asked him, because he was in the English department, what do we know about Ted Hughes? Like, what's the general academic take on Ted Hughes? And it turns out there isn't one. He's done. We don't talk about Ted Hughes anymore. Ted Hughes is effectively dead in academia for multiple reasons. One, he is another in a long line of straight, white, cis men who have gotten enough attention and enough ink written about them. There's a lot of other more marginalized people who are making poems and who are making art who have been forgotten in the past and are receiving that attention now. And the other thing is, he probably was not a good husband to Sylvia Plath. According to some of her writings to people, her private journals and letters, he was abusive. It appears as though that's most likely. I mean, I'm not here to pass judgment on two dead people and what their relationship was like. I'm not interested in passing judgment on him, but I will say that that is the general consensus. So we have sort of an interesting poet because he's very British, very good, but very sort of forgotten. So it's interesting that Radiohead would choose one of his poems. So what I wanted to do was I ordered this book off of Amazon, and I sincerely suggest you do it. This is a great compilation of poems. It's rich. It's not too challenging, but it's very challenging, if that makes sense. It actually feels like this album. It feels like The Smile album. It feels like a Radiohead album. That level of it's still basically poppy, but also it's very deep, and however much you give to it is however much it gives back. And so I read the poem that this is referring to, The Smile. There's my version of it, all marked up. I'll get to it later. But then I realized the same issue that I had with listening to the singles is the same issue that I had with just reading this one poem. You see, an album, in a lot of ways, is like a collection of poetry. A good collection of poetry like this, which is all unified around a couple different themes. And to just take one poem and take it out is like taking the smoke out of this album and just analyzing it on its own. So I'm going to be studying A Light for Attracting Attention and treating it like it's a compilation of poems, all kind of put together. Musically poems, lyrically poems. And so to do that, I want to maybe just explore, like what's the correlation between Ted Hughes and The Smile? Now listen, I wish that because I've spent a long time going through this, I marked up all sorts of notes. I spent a long time reading this, which I love. It's like my favorite thing to do. Reading a book with a pencil is like my top 5 favorite activities. But what I realized was that sort of like spiritually, like poetically, Ted Hughes and Tom York are in a very similar place. So I wish I could tell you that there's a magic bullet, that you could go through here and you could find song-to-song things and that, Tom is Crow and Crow is Tom. I don't think so. I don't think it's that kind of silly. But I do think there is a poetic perspective, a perspective on the world, which as I describe it, as Ted Hughes describes it, if you are like me and you know Tom York pretty well, and you know this album pretty well, you'll sort of see how it all goes together. So I want to thank my colleague, Stephen, thank you, who pointed me to the Ted Hughes Society that explains this work as a, quote, ideological challenge to both Christianity and humanism. He sees it as an epic folk tale. I think we could see a lot of Tom York's writing in that way. It's all about how God creates a universe, and then God has a companion. And God's companion is Crow. But Crow is kind of like a trickster. He's like really a crow, but also he's kind of cynical. And he's this sort of, again, that kind of folk feeling. A lot of creation myths actually have crows in them across different indigenous populations in the world. Well, of course, Christianity is a creation myth. Let's not kid ourselves. But it's in that kind of realm where Crow is this ambiguous, curious figure who is sort of simultaneously a figure of joy and a figure of cynicism. Tom York is Crow. Okay, he's not. But do you see the parallels there? According to the Ted Hughes Society, he's very influenced by Yugoslavian poet Vasko Popa, who my wife studied a lot when she was in high school. And what's interesting here, this is what Ted Hughes said about Vasko Popa. And what I think we can also say about Tom York. Managed to grow up to a view of the unaccommodated universe with their sympathies intact. So like a universe that's difficult, a universe that is unfair, a universe that is uncaring, and still maintain their sympathies. So if we think about this in relationship to The Smile, I think the position that is on here of Crow, he's not called the Crow, he's just called Crow. Of Crow is a kind of world-weary, observational, cynical person. Somebody who talks about realizing that there are two gods. One who loves their enemies and has all the weapons. I'm going to do some reading. I wasn't going to do reading, but people keep telling me that they like my voice. I hate my voice, but what are you going to do? So this is called Examination at the Womb Door. And it's, I want you to buy poetry, okay? You should really enjoy poetry, especially if you're out of college or whatever. It's just great. It's awesome. It doesn't have to be heavy. You don't have to feel stupid. You can just read it. And if you don't get it, like me when I read Mallarmé, you just read the pretty words and you move on. That's what you can do. So here's just an example. And, okay. 1 second. I have to put on my glasses. That was my birthday. For my 44th birthday, so I need glasses. Who owns these scrawny little feet? Death. Who owns this bristly, scorched-looking face? Death. Who owns these still-working lungs? Death. Who owns this utility coat of muscles? Death. Who owns these unspeakable guts? Death. Who owns these questionable brains? Death. All this messy blood? Death. These minimum efficiency eyes? Death. This wicked little tongue? Death. This occasional wakefulness? Death. Given, stolen, or held pending trial? Held. Who owns the whole rainy, stony earth? Death. Who owns all of space? Death. Who is stronger than hope? Death. Who is stronger than the will? Death. Stronger than love? Death. Stronger than life? Death. But who is stronger than death? Me, evidently. Pass, Crow. Isn't that beautiful? I don't know. I think it's a great poem. And I think it sets you up for this kind of, like I'm saying, this poetic outlook on life, this slightly cynical, slightly world-weary, and as we'll see, very nature-connected poetry. Some of the titles sound like Radiohead titles. Truth Kills Everybody's. What's most interesting is what Crow is Crow is something who enters existence in this book. And he enters into this world that's just a wild world that's in chaos and formation all at the same time. It's chaotic and it's forming. Like, we get the story of Genesis retold. We get the story of Adam and Eve retold. We get the story of the creation of the gods. We get the story of the creation of, like, mountains. And the most interesting thing, and this really pertains to the poem The Smile, from which the band is named, is this tendency that he has to make the topographical anatomical. What do I mean by that? Where things that are parts of a landscape, geographical features, become a part of the body. And it's this poetic trick, which I think Tom York and Radiohead use quite a bit. I mean, I often think of their tour poster from 2000, which features this X-ray of teeth over America. Often Tom York will just sing about woods and oceans and moons. And think about Stanley Donwood's covers, you know? I mean, Hail to the Thief is basically a geographical word joke. The cover of this album, which has mountains and looks to be some kind of lake with little rivers or oceans coming off of it. It's all geographical. The cover of Kid A is mostly geographical. Geography and topography and anatomy are often somehow linked. So I think that's particularly interesting when we get to the poem The Smile, because it is the smile which merges these things most together. The smile is not the only physiognomy. It's not the only mouth thing that we... This is where I lose my academic. Some people are watching this, I'm sure, who are real academics, who have studied Ted Hughes, and my inability to say physiognomical mouth things. What I'm talking about is things that the mouth can do, and what does it mean? The Smile is maybe the most important and the best poem in this whole book. I mean, I understand why Radiohead picked it. But also, we have a grimace, a frown, a grin, and a laugh. And almost all of these are tied into nature somehow. A grimace is seen as a snake. Laughter is always cruel. Here are some quotes from the tome. When he laughed, she wept. Cars collide and erupt luggage and babies and laughter. He has a whole thing where like planes crash in laughter over and over and over again. I told myself to read page 42. I don't remember what happens on page 42. Oh yeah, this whole quote about laughter. Still laughter scampers around on centipede boots. Still it runs all over on caterpillar tread and rolls back onto the mattress, legs in the air. But it's only human. And finally it's had enough. Enough! And slowly sits up, exhausted, and slowly starts to fasten buttons with long pauses, like somebody the police have come for. The end of laughter is buttoning up your shirt when you know the police are coming. This is some good stuff right here. And it's interesting that I think it's on purpose. Like, I think that the smile is the ideal in this book. That laughter is an excess of joy, which is often seen as a force of cruelty, perhaps a state of excess. We also have the grin. And a grin is usually in this book a failed smile. So what's interesting is, as we're going to get into the smile eventually, but we'll see that the way the smile is described is something that comes from the earth. And a grin, which comes earlier in the book, is a different poem called A Grin, not The Smile, A Grin. The hidden grin like keeps trying all these different faces, like someone on the electric chair, somebody with mother and birth, and eventually sinks back into the skull. I love this image of a grin sinking back into the skull because we're eventually going to see that the skull and the earth, like the human body and the earth all around, becomes essentially just one thing. Eventually, in a poem called The Contender, we see the strongest man on earth, Jesus, who grins on the cross. He describes the crucifixion as a senseless trial of strength. And later Crow, where did Crow go? Later Crow picks at the two thieves who are still on the cross. What we have, most importantly, is The Smile, which is an interesting poem. You can find it online. You don't have to just listen to me read it. It's findable. And it's like about like the triumphant joy. I think the triumphant joy of nature. I mean, like when we see smiles aren't referenced that much. It's mostly grins and laughter. Earlier, before this, there's a whole story about a battle, about the end of a battle. So the survivors state, and the earth and the sky stayed. Everything took blame. Not a leaf flinched. Nobody smiled. So smiling appears to be the highest level of happiness. It's not as lacking in measure as laughter. It's not as restrained as grinning. And when I read this to you, when I read you the poem The Smile, that gave the band The Smile their name, you'll see what I mean. Gotta have my glasses back on. My wife thinks I look great in these glasses. I think I look like an old man. The Smile. Oh, smash the like bucket, subscribe, join my Reddit. I have a subreddit now. I'll talk to you over there if you want. But do leave comments here, because that means other people get to see my stuff. The Smile by Ted Hughes. Began under the groan of the oldest forest. It ran through the clouds a third light, and it ran through the skin of the earth. So immediately we had this idea of the smile being something that's subterranean that comes up. It's under the oldest forest, through the clouds, and through the skin of the earth. We see it going all over the place, this mythical, semi-personified smile. It came circling the earth, like the lifted bow of a wave's submarine running, tossing the willows and swelling the elm tops, looking for its occasion. So we had this image of like a smile just flying all over the earth, like an uncontained spirit that's on the willow tops and under the ground and in the water and everywhere. But people were prepared. People were prepared. So people didn't want the smile. They met it with visor smiles and mirrors of ricochet, with smiles that stole a bone, and smiles that went off with a mouthful of blood, and smiles that left poison in a numb place, or doubled up, covering a getaway. So the humans here, and there aren't that many humans in this story, it's mostly animals, but we see them as not wanting the smile. They have a visor smile, like armor. They're trying to push it away. The smiles here are blood. So it's like a fight between a sort of primordial, pure, spiritual, natural smile versus a corrupted human smile. But the smile was too vast. It outflanked all. It was too tiny. It slipped between the atoms, so that the steel screeched open like a gutted rabbit The skin was nothing. Then the pavement and the air and the light confined all the jumping blood, no better than a paper bag. People were running with bandages, but the world was a drafty gap. The whole creation was just a broken gutter pipe. I understand he might not have been a good person. He's a hell of a poet. Pavement and the air and the light confined all the jumping blood. So we see this enveloping smile, which is simultaneously too large and too small. I'm going out on a limb here. I think maybe the smile is supposed to represent the soul. That's what I'm thinking. That a soul is too big and too small to be contained, and human beings fight off souls. But I don't know. I spent like hours on this stupid book, and I just come up with my thesis here while recording in my one-take, stupid, never-edit, stupid show. And then there was the unlucky person's eye, pinned under its brow, widening for the darkness behind it, which kept right on getting wider, darker, as if the soul were not working. So we have this person here he's going to be the vehicle that receives the smile. And his eye is pinned under his brow, and it's widening for the darkest behind it. And behind the eye is nothing. It's like the soul isn't working. And at that very moment, the smile arrived. And the crowd, shoving to get a glimpse of a man's soul stripped to its last shame, met this smile that rose through his torn roots, touching his lips, altering his eyes, and for a moment, mending everything before it swept out across the earth. So I think we can see this in multiple ways. We can see this as this metaphysical smile that's like in battle with human beings. I think we can see it as like a human skull, like just being the whole battlefield, and like the smile itself is like rising up, and we smile, like, and we smile, and that's the moment of smiling. It can be micro or it can be macro, but I think that's what's important is this place of smiling, this importance of this voluntary act that is an involuntary reaction to positive stimulus. Interestingly enough, the next poem, which I'm not going to read the whole thing of, ends with another reference to the smile. So he took his birth sneeze in one hand and his death chill in the other, and let the spark scour him to ashes. And so the smile, not even Leonardo could have fathomed, flew off into the air, the rubbish heap of laughter, screams, discretions, indiscretions, etc. So it seems to me this might be about the fleeting, the furtive nature of smiling, of just being something you can't quite capture, you can't quite hold, something which flies away. And that's what they did. Now listen, maybe Tom York and Johnny Greenwood, Nigel Godrich and Tom Skinner just got together and were like, this poem's cool, bro. Cool, let's call it The Smile. And they weren't thinking about it. But I don't think so. They're smarty smart pants folks. And so I think it is actually important to sit with that poem yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Read that poem, because the feeling that poem gives me is the feeling that this album gives me. There is intertextuality, obviously. That's when two different works are connected by a reference. There's obviously intertextuality, but beyond that, there is artistic synergy between these works, between these poetic visions. Okay, there we go. 2354. I have to remember that. That's now you've joined back. You didn't want to hear anything about poetry, so that's fine. Welcome back. Smash the like bucket, subscribe, join my Reddit, my Instagram. I don't do Twitter anymore. Not really. It's not because I hate Elon Musk. It's because I don't like Twitter. So this album. Let's talk about this album a little bit, huh? The narrative is funny on this album, that they couldn't stop creating, so they had to make an album even if it wasn't going to be with all of Radiohead. Because, like, hey guys, Moonshade Pool came out like 5 years ago? 6 years ago? So, like, it's not like we've been in COVID for 6 years. You could have just made another Radiohead album, but that's fine. I've been thinking a lot about why Tom Skinner in particular, and why he's good, and because here's the thing. Phil Selway is the drummer for Radiohead, and newsflash, he is awesome. He's a great drummer. He's one of the great rock drummers. That's how good he is. He's not as good of a drummer as Tom Skinner, but this is where we get things a little bit messed up and weird. And I want to draw another parallel between another aging British rock god, the Rolling Stones. So, the Rolling Stones have Charlie Watts, my personal favorite rock drummer of all time. I did a video after he passed. I think he's great. I think he has great style. But can he do everything that the best drummer from Berklee School of Music or from wherever the hell Tom Skinner went to school to learn how to play drums? No, he can't. And when Keith Richards went on tour in the late 80s and early 90s, and I saw him perform. I've seen the Stones 3 times and Keith Richards once. And I've seen one good concert out of all those, and it was Keith Richards. He had Steve Jordan play drums. Steve Jordan's an amazing studio drummer, just so great. And he could do things with Steve Jordan that he can't do with Charlie Watts. But it doesn't take anything away from what Charlie Watts can do. It's just different. It's not better. And that's why I think Tom Skinner is so great, because Tom Skinner can do things that Phil Selway can't. But he's not a better drummer. He's just like a better drummer, if that makes sense. He's more talented, but he might not have all the same style. So that's kind of how I see this. Because as a drummer myself, it's kind of unsettling to have this idea of like, let's just replace the drummer with a younger, cooler guy. A guy who probably doesn't need reading glasses. Also, the cover reminds me a lot of Kids See Ghosts, the Kid Cudi and Kanye album. And I realized this whole album, I also feel a sort of Kids See Ghost vibe off of this album as well. Maybe it's the collaborationist feeling. Maybe it's some of the thematics. I'm not going to flesh out that theory. I'm just going to throw that at you. And if you see what I mean, you tell me in those comments. You tell me, Sky, I totally get what you mean, even if I can't explain it. Another parallel I find interesting is David Bowie. Because David Bowie was famous for just taking musicians in their prime and just borrowing them and using them and basically in a weird sort of symbiotic vampire situation, like giving them his cool while sucking out their cool. There's this really interesting jazz moment that's happening right now in England. It's spearheaded, I would say, by Sons of Kemet, which is just a great album, and I reviewed it, and they're wonderful. But also, like adjacent bands like Soccer 96, who I reviewed last week. There's this like young, classically trained, excellent British musician scene going, and to a certain extent, there's a nice little vampiric thing happening here, where they're sucking young blood a little bit of they're sucking young blood. And also, as far as Bowie goes, some of the vocal production, it seems like there's kind of a playfulness with the bravado of the way he's singing, and some of the vocal distortions that are used on here reminds me a little bit of like late era 90s David Bowie, but that could just be me. When this album is at its worst is when it feels like a Tom York solo project. Okay? When it's at its best, I'd say it has 2 different modes when it's at its best. One is I call it a moon-shaped 2. It feels like a good sequel to a moon-shaped pool. But one thing, I was listening to this with my wife, and my wife really likes this album a lot, which is great, because it means when I take my Patreon's money to buy it, we'll get to listen to it in the house. But she said that, it doesn't really sound like a step forward. It kind of sounds like their last album. And she's not like a huge Radiohead fan. I'm like, yeah, it's true. At times it sounds like a moon-shaped pool too. And then there's the other time which by the way is awesome, and I am personally happy to have more of that sound. I'll get more into it when I get more into the musical analysis. But there's also just this other side of it that's just dudes playing music together. Just happy dudes playing music together. They're just very talented and having fun, and it sounds at times a little jammy, a little bit like we need to come up with, like they'll just be sitting there, and they'll be like, the first part's like, okay, so then the second part will be like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like it has that feeling of collaboration as opposed to songwriting with a capital S. So let's go through the album. I usually do a stamp, like an example song, I'll do that, but I'm going to do it when it comes up because I want to treat this album as an album. So it starts off with a track called "The Same," and this is really Tomming it up. There's no Tom Skinner on here. This is all Tom York. Bloopy keyboard opening, a little bit unexpected, very kind of Nigel and Radiohead soundy. This is when I talk about like the need to listen to stuff multiple times because I heard this for the first time in my kitchen, and it was good. But then I listened to it at the gym with my headphones in, and it was divine because you just get to hear all the different layers. Sometimes these little like minor notes, I consider those to be Johnny notes, little minor Johnny notes thrown in there, kind of cynical and idealistic lyrics at the same time, talking about the mistakes that we make, how we're simple as MFers, kind of a triumphant chorus. Just so well produced. This wasn't what I was expecting from the album at all. I was expecting it all to be jammy, like The Smoke. The Smoke, which is just like, in some ways, the most jammiest just riff, right? But certain parts, there's like these crushing industrial sounds or these great acrobatic pianos underneath, and then it ends with like kind of like this weird whimper. We're going to come back to that. Lyrically, we don't need to fight. Look towards the light. It happens to be, I don't know, happens to be that the light is an important theme in Crow as well. Crow thought, alas, ought I to stop eating and try to become the light. But his eye saw a grub and his head trap sprung, stabbed. I think I'm telling you, the entire time I was reading Crow, I had Tom York's falsetto. Crow, alas, ought I. Dude, my Tom York impersonation is lit. But, just this idea of like the crow thinking maybe he should become the light, but then he saw a grub and he ate it instead. But what I like about this is that this is Tom York being hopeful. This is him being idealistic. This is why I think it's called The Smile and not something depressing and weird from Crow instead. Because most of Crow is depressing and weird and dark and scary and oddly sexual. Dude, creation of woman. He describes like Adam and Eve as Crow taking a worm, and I'm not even going to talk about it. You're going to buy that book off of Amazon. It's like $13, like next day shipping or whatever. Or go to your local bookstore and buy it. It's a fun read. But what I love here is he's just a little idealist here. Tommy Feelgood right here. We're all the same. We're all the same. We all want the same stuff. We don't need to fight. Look towards the light. Yeah, man. There's something about COVID, which is like death, which is that it was an equalizer, right? So for that period of time where we were all stuck in the house, there was a certain equality between us. Whenever I'm at the gym and it's on, I love watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I find it to be a very interesting show, both enjoyable and an object of study. But I saw the episode where they went into lockdown. And it's like, it doesn't matter how rich you are or how famous you are. Your crew's not showing up the next day. There's a heartbreaking scene where like the mom had to talk to the daughter. I guess it was Kim or Chloe or Katie or Cacophony or whatever they're called. She was talking through a plate glass window. And here's the question for you. What's the difference between me not being able to hug my dad on his 80th birthday and Caprice Kardashian not being able to talk to her mom except through a glass window? There's none. We are all the same. Which then leads into the next song, the opposite. Here, I'll say this is my stamp. Click on the banana if you want to hear an example song of what they sound like. Here's the drummer. Just a beautiful line. This is that jammy side of this album. Just this great drum line. Guitar comes in. It's kind of jammy and loose. A catchy melody. Weird voice changes. Goes up and down. This also is kind of a combination of those two good things. Because it also reminds me a lot of a Moon-Shaped Pool. The guitar work on here seems like it's lifted directly off of Moon-Shaped Pool. It's this kind of thing that Johnny's been doing. These kind of crinkly, winding guitars. This is why I really needed repeated listenings. Because I didn't even pick up on these choral voices that are in the back. I was so focused on the groove, and a lot of this album is just super groovy that you don't even really notice like these little production details. And just the dynamics of Tom's voice, especially like it gets so passionate and so dry at the same time. Again, I think that's a way that we can compare him with Ted Hughes' work, his ability to be sort of passionate and dry at the same time. The lyrics here are mostly about kind of a game show feeling. But then, you thought you were done with poetry. You're not done with poetry. We're done with Ted Hughes for now, but you're not done with poetry. But don't worry, I'm about to make a point so good that I don't even want to say it, because I want to go write a paper about it. But I'm not going to, so I'm going to say it, and you can write a paper about it. So, thanks to Genius.com, the often maligned, yet often delightful website, they point out that the reference, "What will become of us, the straw is coming out of us," is a reference to a T.S. Eliot poem, The Hollow Men. I'm going to quote The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. You've heard of the Hollow Men, you just don't know it. The world will end not with a bang, but with a whimper. That's The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas, our dried voices when we whisper together, all quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass. I mean, those are just Tom York lyrics. And this was my moment. This is what I wish I could write a paper about, but I'm going to give it to you, unless the paper hasn't been written yet. Tom York is very influenced by T.S. Eliot. Now, this is not new. I read somewhere that he performed Wasteland. He's quoted Wasteland as well, a different T.S. Eliot poem, in other songs of his. And apparently he had to perform it at school, in high school or something, and he was like super into it. Sometimes in high school, even no matter how bitter you are, you end up learning something. Like I learned about Eugene Ionesco and Bald Soprano. I was like the worst student in the world. They gave me a section of that play, and it changed my world forever, right? So I can totally see him being drawn to this. And this kind of world-weary, cynical but joyful way of looking at the world, headpiece filled with straw, our dried voices when we whisper together, all quiet, mindless as wind in dry grass. But this is the linchpin. What's my number one problem with Tom York? If you don't know, I complain a lot about Tom York's lyricism, because he always goes to Cliché Town. He's like, right, I very much like a ticket for Cliché Town. Right, I've got some great lyrics going here. It would be nice if I could, I don't know, say, all's well that ends well. It's like, dude, you wrote all these good lyrics. Why do you have to throw a damn cliche in here? It's because that's what T.S. Eliot does. T.S. Eliot paraphrases all around the mulberry bush. Here we go round the prickly pear, the prickly pear, the prickly pear in this poem. And he even quotes the Bible, the Lord's Prayer, for thine is the kingdom. T.S. Eliot is the original Tom York of writing beautiful lines and then smushing in ready-made phrases that are overheard in everyday speech. So, that's my gift to you, future academic. You want to write a paper, T.S. Eliot and Tom York, just cite me, okay? Just that's all. Just cite this video and send me a message. Let me know, because I'll be happy. Because goddamn, I want to write that paper. Next song is called You'll Never Work in Television Again, which I've already reviewed. I've already asked you to smash the banana on that one, so don't worry about that. I will say that in that commentary, I referred to it as having 4 hi-hat hits, and it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My mistake. I'm not Adam Neely. I'm Professor Skeely. Next song is called Panavision, kind of haunting piano, kind of a ghost voice. This is that kind of ghostly feel that Tom York is getting into a lot so much now. His eyes are open wide, cool strings and odd rhythms. You know, it's cool when you hear that because you can tell the strings are Johnnytown and then the odd rhythms are Skinnerville, you know. This one, Johnny Greenwood, is really Greenwooding it up. It's more of a kind of a groove. There's nice kind of like a stutter in the rhythm here. Like I was, you know, because I'm a drummer, a mediocre drummer. So I'm like sitting there and I'm like kind of like playing drums along with it, but there's like a little stutter. Like I knew it was in a weird time signature, but it's a little bit there. A beautiful breakdown in this song with just piano and the strength of Tom's voice. This is one thing I would like though. I want Radiohead to play this song. I want them to do a rock and roll version, and I want Johnny to take all of his violins and his basses and his violoncellos and smash them. Smash them like John Belushi smashes the guitar in Animal House, and just have a rock and roll version, because there's like this. This is great. But I want. Like I want a rock version. lyrics here seem to be maybe about Boris Johnson or Donald Trump, or I don't even know what the difference is. Like, I sincerely wonder, for people who pay a lot of attention to British politics, like British people, who are forced to pay attention to American politics, how demonstrably different are their feelings towards Johnson and Trump? I don't know. So it's kind of like an emperor's new clothes thing. Forget everything you know. What's interesting here is one of the lines, forget everything you knew as it opens wide like a newborn child, opens wide like a newborn child. It's a huge theme in Crow, childbirth. It appears over and over again. So I do think that's intentional. Next song is called The Smoke, which I've already reviewed. You can find, I'll put a link to that at the end here. Just the grooviest of the groovy. This is probably my favorite song on the album, just because, like, I just want to, you know what I mean? I just want to, and then his singing, and he's got that kind of Marvin Gaye, just, very good. Speech Bubbles is the first song that I did that thing where I listened to it 3 times in a row, and I love it. Remember when I reviewed Soccer 96? No, you don't, because no one watched that video, because people don't watch Thunderground Thursday. Almost every Thursday, as many Thursdays as I can, time permitting, I feature lesser-known bands, unsigned bands, or bands on smaller labels, or bands I've just never heard of that are kind of small, including Soccer 96. It's this crazy awesome duo that has a piano player, a keyboard player, and a drummer, and they're awesome. And if you like The Smile, you'll like them. So listen to their music and get my video up over 1,000 views, will you? God, you really punish me for trying to find new stuff, I can't just talk about Kendrick and Kanye all the time. Actually, I could. What's funny is that they play with a guy named Tom Herbert, who's on that album as well. And if you actually just look at the credits between the albums, with this album, with the Sons of Kemet album and this, there really is a whole kind of soup of this virtuosic British music explosion. So at the same time that we could spend all this time with Black Country New Road and Black Midi and Idols and this whole post-punk thing, we have a whole nother thing happening where if you're a super good musician, you have a job in England. It's a good deal. Ominous kind of Kid A sounds to open up, almost like a bad church service, and then the drums come in. The guitar is very Radiohead-like here. The strings kind of threaten and then fall back. I really love when the drums come in here, just a very subtle, wonderful beat. Eventually things get overwhelmed by strings. Johnny Greenwood, he loves strings. That's what he does. That's his thing. He's mainly a strings guy now, right? He used to be the Chaos Box dude, which is a cool little machine that makes all those weird sounds like kid-a, kid-a, kid-a. But now he's a strings guy. He likes orchestrating, and that makes sense. But this is the song where I had... the best. I talk about this every once in a while. People like it when I talk about personal experience. So, I'd gone to the gym, and I've been having all these muscle pains, so I haven't really been going to the gym that much lately. It's been bugging me because I'm kind of vain and insecure and body image issues and all that stuff. So I left the gym, and I felt good. My body felt fine. I was listening to this, and I'd listened to it 3 times in a row because this is where I realized I had to do that in order to really understand this album. And there's just this really crisp rain. Just this because we're in the spring right now. It's a very spring rain. And even though it was a little bit cold and I was just wearing shorts, I just felt bathed in this clean and this bridge and the strings and this, I just felt this overwhelming sense of happiness to this song. Despite the fact that the song is I was incredibly feeling this good would tell me where to stick the needle in. But that's what it is to love Thom Yorke's music. Having orgasmically wonderful, delightful moments of peace and joy while listening to some really depressing crap. The lyrics here is very reminiscent of I Will, a track off of Hail to the Thief. One of my favorite songs. I played a lot with my kids. It's kind of hard though, because my wife is Serbian and she has been bombed, so she's had that experience of having her city being bombed. Unfortunately, she wasn't bombed, but she was in a city that was bombed and the air raids and all that. So the kind of fanciful sort of thought of it as being far away became a lot closer. So now when I think about that song and I think about that happening right now in Ukraine, I can talk myself into tears right now. I won't let this happen to my children. Forget it. But this right here feels very much a continuation on that, which of course it has to be. My city's on fire. Now there's never any place to put my feet back down. No, there's never anywhere. Just a meaningful and important song. And I get it that people sometimes think Tom York is too whiny and all that, but we need people to talk about oil spills. We need people to talk about bombings, you know? Next song is called Thin Thing. Thin Thing? Thin Thing. Thin Thing. Why do I need to clean my teeth every time I say that? You try saying it at home. See if you don't want to clean your teeth. Okay, I'll do the door thing. Can you say thin thing? Good. Swipe or no swiping. Oh my God, this song. This song is so awesome. I think he's like tapping the guitar. I think he's like, I think he's doing like that. I think he's maybe even like doing like finger tapping, like, you know, Eddie Van Halen stuff. I can't quite tell what he's doing, but it creates this insane staccato sound, and like the drums come in on both ears, but that guitar sound is just in the left, and it's just a really, really unexpected original groove. You know, the rest of the album has a lot of great grooves, but this is an original groove. There's this great organ part that comes in. Eventually the bass just gets super badass on here. This is sort of the best of their noodling around. I just love it. I love this, the cascading end of the song. Lyrically, it's interesting. It's more about rabbit holes. I did the whole Arcade Fire thing, and they have a whole song called Rabbit Holes. Down a rabbit hole we go as the flames grow higher for unbelievers, making mushrooms out of men till she turns us back again. I am going crazy. I swear, I saw a video recently about some kind of fairy that turns people into mushrooms. It was like a music video of a band I've reviewed in the last 2 months. And if you would please tell me what music video that is, I would be so thankful. Open the Floodgates is the next song. Almost reminds me of Pyramid Song by Radiohead, with this rhythm that's hard to place. You know, the thing, if you ever try playing Pyramid Song on piano, bun, 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 they're like, just forget it. Like 1,000 Adam Neely's can't figure out the time signature on that. I don't think. It's very difficult. But this got this great piano, a little bit of bloops here, very smooth bass. The lyrics, I don't know. The lyrics are sort of complaining about being a rock star. Don't bore us with the chorus. Basically, give us the hits. I don't know. I do like the post-verse, kind of high warbled sound. Just great guitar on here. Maybe the best layering of, like, on the whole album of strings. Free in the Knowledge is like an acoustic guitar starting song, which is, you realize, like, oh, wow. Guitar, like acoustic guitar. I don't think I've heard that on the album yet. Gorgeous singing. But this is my least favorite style of his singing. This kind of like, free in and out, like there's a sort of like, I don't particularly like, it's gorgeous, but I don't like it. It's, you know. But I do really love the break into the second part. It's funny too, because he talks a lot about facing the man in the mirror. And I think, you know, Kendrick Lamar's last album ended with The Mirror. And then this has that, and Michael Jackson has The Man in the Mirror. We're at an interesting point where mirrors are increasingly important. Kind of existential lyrics here. So this is what I'm talking about we're all free before COVID, right? Whether or not we're Kris Kardashian or we're Sky Payne, right? Free in the knowledge that one day this will end. So what I love is that one day this will end, meaning we'll all die, right? Who is stronger than death? Who is stronger than death? Me, evidently. You know, but what controls everything? What determines everything? What owns all the space and the sea? Death, right? And COVID represents death, but also COVID represents change, because free in the knowledge that everything is change. Because not only does COVID represent death, but it represents change, because we have to change in order to live with it, in order to hopefully not die. An interesting lyric here too. It's just a bad moment and we are fumbling around. And I think that's a good description for the global reaction to the COVID pandemic. Fumbling around. A Hairdryer is the next song. Super, like, crazy compressed sounds on the bass drum. Really cool, echoing and weird. Kind of a very intricate drum beat. Maybe even, I would call it fussy. I'm not quite sure. I apparently I read the lyrics and it really feels like it's Hail to the Thief Part 2. I don't know. It talks about a blue-eyed fox, and I guess that could refer to Trump or to Johnson. And there's a lot of talks about hair dryers and going south. So I assume that means going to Florida, which Trump does all the time. Come soft night and pick me apart. Open my eyes. Look at all the pretty lies. I don't know. Maybe crow picks apart eyes, doesn't it? I don't know. But it's an okay political song. I don't actually love it when Tom York gets political. Wait, let me phrase that more correctly. I don't like it when he gets political. I mean, I hated Bush as much as anybody when he was in power. But I still I was never psyched. It was like, hail to the thief, right? That's 2 + 2 = 5. I'm sorry. I'm mixing. The song's not called Hail to the Thief. Oh, Jesus. the Radiohead heads would have come after me there. I like this song, though, because it's really a mixture of everybody. Like, it's got the York songwriting. It's got very cinematic parts, like Johnny. The drummer's just doing this really cool, maybe even overly cool drum beat. And then at the end, we have these waves of distortion, which to me are the hallmarks of Nigel Godrich's production. These kind of like synthetic waves of distortion. It's really nice. Waving a white flag is the worst lyrics and the best music. So a beautiful, lush arpeggiator going on here, an odd rhythm. The guitar comes in. I love, maybe the best part of the whole album is this moment with this orchestra and the synthesizer and the voice, and the drums are low on the back. If you don't love this album, I would say listen to this song and just listen to this one a couple times in a row and just find that moment where it all comes together. Again, like the more I listen to this album, the more I realize it isn't just 3 guys from Radiohead and some guy they found. It is 4 people working together. But the lyrics just sound improvised. Didn't see you come in. There has to be a way out. Another way out. Come on, Tom. What is this? A Tom York lyric generator? We don't know what tomorrow brings. More cliche. It starts off with an actual click. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kind of badass chugging guitar. And wah sounds behind. Kind of pumps me up. Almost... It sounds to me, and I don't know if this is okay. I am going to write a fanciful recreation of them in the studio making this song, unless this is one of the ones that Tom wrote by himself. Hi, wouldn't it be funny, more British accents, if we did a version of Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones? Oh, crack on, spot, piss, right? Like, because there's like, if you listen to the guitar, there's this high guitar line that's essentially the Satisfaction riff, but just a little bit tweaked, a little bit twisted, and up high. More just cliches in the lyrics here. The grass is always green. Get it while you can. But hey, who am I to blame Tom York when he's just following in the tradition of T.S. Eliot? The album ends very gracefully with the song Skating on the Surface. Beautiful echo drums. The guitars on the right, very subtle, great guitar work. Voice is as clear as it is anywhere on the album. Just, if you don't love the drummer yet, listen to just the drum fills, these like subtle drum fills, because when you're this good of a drummer, it's never a question of can you, it's a question of should you. And he is a really good should drummer. He knows what he should do and when he should do it. At a certain part, these like gorgeous horns arrive, and it turns out it's some of the players from Sons of Kemet, including the main guy, Theon. And it's this beautiful ending song, a perfect ending song. It's like the thesis statement of the album at the end of the album, dynamics, and there's a certain point where the horns come in for this outro, when we realize we only have to die and then we're out of here. Going back to this theme of this universality of death that COVID reminds us of, when we realize that we are broke and nothing mends, we can drop under the surface. That life is skating on the surface, it's not very tenable, and we're all naturally going to fall under into the state of death. What is beneath the skating surface? Death. To what will we plunge once we are no longer skating? Death. What is underneath the surface? Death. What is the source of true depth? Death. And who is stronger than death? Me, evidently. It's great, and it thematically ties everything all together here. The horns, just the ending here. This ending instrumental is just so good. It's so good. I can't believe I thought I didn't like this album when I first heard it, because just this part, these horns taking center stage, and then the Marvin Gaye kind of high singing, and it sounds almost like the Joker theme on these strings, like this high, like beautiful. So that's my review. I don't even know what I'm going to title this. A poetic journey through the smile? I don't know. What did you think of the poetry stuff? Did you like it? I mean, I know some of you I just finished my semester. My grades are due tomorrow. So, got a grade. I've actually finished grading all my finals, except for some late finals. So I'm doing pretty well here. Maybe you just finished finals, and the last thing you want to do is get a lesson from a professor about poetry. But hey. So do please join my Reddit. I just started it going. Someone started it a couple weeks ago, and I discovered it. So go on there, talk about this. Also, you feel free to join my Patreon, / Professor Sky. For the non-weekend shows, I'll often ask, hey, does anyone want a shout out if you like this band? And Claudio West, Charlotte K, and Sugar Mouse all wanted a shout out because they really like this album. And that's a thing that I offer on Patreon. And you don't have to be at the top level for that. I just, whatever. You know, I have like 65 Patreons, and if all 65 Patreons really loved Radiohead who wanted to be on here, I'd just be sitting there reading off all their names. Because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Well, until next time. There's the camera.